All righty, ladies and gentlemen, it appears that we've gotten some of the biggest news that Wuthering Waves has received when it comes to its combat in the most recent set of update notes. And that update is going to be on nothing other than the new negative statuses that are coming to the game. Not actually new ones, but updates to existing ones that we have never actually had access to as players, only the bosses have had them, so they're essentially new. And those negative statuses are going to be Havoc Bane, Fusion Burst, Glacio Chafe, and Electro Flare. And so essentially all of these negative statuses used to have prior effects that were a little bit more unique. They were covered in a prior note from the developers in the past, but it didn't really matter too much because we didn't really have any characters in the game that were actually able to use them. And so what I wanted to do was actually take the time to break down what all of these new status effects are actually going to do. And of course, right, some of the existing characters, or maybe some of the newer characters that are going to be joining the roster, whether or not they're actually going to be able to take on some of these effects. So, yeah, there's a couple of clues from the live stream already about, the newest negative status that's coming to the game. So why don't we go ahead and start talking a bit about that new addition. And that's going to be Havoc Bane. So it's pretty clear by now from the resources that we have in the game, some of the existing bosses that are out there, like the Remini Thronodian Echo set, we all pretty much know, and we've known since the start of version 2.7, that Havoc Bane is going to be coming to this game. And that's essentially been confirmed over here. Chisa's going to be having it. There's a reason why they're releasing all of this information right now. And from what I just showed you before, when it comes to the Echo set, Thread of Severed Fate, where you see the scissors, yeah, inflicting Havoc Bane is going to increase your attack by 20% and then grant you a 30% liberation damage bonus. So that's all stuff that's going on. So when it comes to Havoc Bane and the new effect that it's going to have, this is what it will do. Some Havoc attacks will apply a stackable Havoc Bane effect to the target. And while Havoc Bane lasts, the defense of the inflicted target is reduced, and Havoc Bane stacks up to 3 times by default, with each stack reducing the defense by 2%. So Havoc Bane actually used to be a negative status effect, where it would stack up to a certain amount and then detonate, dealing a certain amount of damage. Now it's essentially just a damage increasing effect. You can basically view Havoc Bane, and it stacks on an enemy as an increase to your character's attack, your increase to your character's attribute damage, an increase to your damage type. It's just going to make all of your attacks deal more damage. And so what that means is that Chisa, as a character, is probably going to be one that might have a lot of viability in a lot of teams, because a cornerstone of her kit, and you can tell from the Sonata set effect, you're applying Havoc Bane. And what does Havoc Bane do? It makes the enemy take more damage from everything. That just sounds good. That just sounds multi-purpose. And if that's the role that Chisa's going to play, because another thing that we heard about the character was that she's a healer. Guys, Havoc Bane might actually be the most overall usable and the most general of all the negative status effects. And it might actually be one of the negative statuses that's actually, meant to be used in a bunch of different teams. I don't actually see Havoc Bane as one of those negative statuses where you need, or maybe even want, other characters that apply Havoc Bane. Think about it this way. If Havoc Bane is reducing the target's defense, does that mean that they're also going to take more damage from things like Arrow Erosion or Spectro Frazzle? And the answer is probably, yeah. For your Arrow Erosion appliers, their erosion stacks will probably deal more damage to enemies that have Havoc Bane on them. Your Spectro Frazzle stacks, wait, let me put up a character like Phoebe, will probably deal more damage when they have Havoc Bane on them. And to me, this looks like one of the most creative additions to the game, and I'm actually surprised that we're just going to straight up have one of the negative statuses be this unrestricted and this usable across a bunch of different lineups. I would say, just at a first pass from this, Kuro Games has actually listened. they have actually kept in mind a lot of the feedback that they've gotten, probably from the design of kits like Zani, the design of kits like Phoebe, the design of kits like Chakota and Cartithia, where people feel like, oh man, it's kind of really fucking annoying how these characters feel like they need to be paired with each other. And then I see Havoc Bane, the first on this list, and it seems like it's the direct, complete, polar opposite. On the other hand, though, I am interested in seeing how well other Havoc Bane characters will synergize with other Havoc Bane characters. I want to see if the Havoc version of Rover gets their own version of Havoc Bane, because that's what the Spectral version's gotten, and the Arrow version, while they can't apply their own erosion, they can't do it, right? They still support the archetype. Is Havoc Rover going to have some buffs? Is Havoc Rover going to have some interactions where they detonate Havoc Bane stacks, or they deal more damage to enemies specifically that have Havoc Bane? Maybe. Who knows? Maybe they'll apply it themselves in their rotation. That would give them a lot more roles on a lot more teams. It would actually be really cool. But they might actually be too strong with it, because the debuff sounds incredibly strong in the first place. We don't know. And I am interested in seeing if Havoc Bane synergizes with itself at all, or based off of how it works, you're just not meant to use it with other users of Havoc Bane. But, like I said before, it's one of the most interesting debuffs that we've gotten, and I think it's very, very, very well designed for a bunch of different multi-purpose use cases. So great job by Kuro Games with this. Now, we're going to start getting into some unreleased ones. But at a baseline, what we probably can expect, unless Havoc Rover breaks the mold, is that Rover is going to have some sort of role when it comes to supporting these archetypes. And we'll also think about some of the existing fusion characters in the game, and, you know, kind of like how that negative status stuff is going to develop further. Because the next one up is Fusion Burst. And one thing that we know about Fusion is that they have a special mono team due to the existence of a character like Lupa. So the discussion might actually feature her quite a bit, just so we can actually, you know, get down to the nitty-gritty of what this actually does. So this is what Fusion Burst has in store for us. Some fusion attacks will apply a stackable Fusion Burst effect to the target. When Fusion Burst is stacked to its max, all stacks will be removed to trigger an explosion. So yeah, build up of stacks over time and then a detonation at the end, dealing fusion damage around the target. Fusion Burst effect stacks up to 10 times by default, and the higher the stacks, the more damage dealt. So the way that I view like Fusion Burst, its interactions and all of that stuff and how it's going to be working is that, I'm going to be honest, the perfect sort of character to apply it, if it is something that they plan on adding to older kits, would be like something like Chisa or Chisha, right? Where she like has like her flame on pistol fingers, you know, gun mode, where she just like shoots all of this stuff. That sounds like something that would build up over time and then like end up like detonating, right? On the other hand, it's not really something else that makes a whole lot of sense for other characters. This seems like something that is going to not really apply at all to the existing cast, and I feel like the only sort of real support for Fusion Burst that's going to exist in this game is like having Lupa in as just like a general fusion buffer. But then we also have to know that Fusion Burst damage actually scales with like your character's stats, because this is kind of like one of the finicky parts about negative statuses and the damage that they actually deal. This is one of the odd parts. Spectral Frazzle damage and Arrow Erosion damage don't actually like scale with your character's stats. They kind of just deal a fixed amount of damage that scales, I think, with like one thing. I think it scales with like your attribute damage, just like your general stat, and not much more beyond that. That makes these more damaging oriented negative statuses feel like their ceiling is a little bit lower. And it doesn't necessarily feel that great. Think of them potentially as a little bit like Elemental Mastery in Genshin Impact. Genshin has a direct stat that scales up the amount that these reactions or these interactions or these effects actually deal. And Wuthering Waves doesn't really have a stat like that. And so when you think about it from the perspective of a lot of these negative statuses dealing damage that scales up over time, it makes me wonder, is Wuthering Waves going to introduce a stat in the future that's going to interact with the amount of damage, specifically, that these negative statuses are dealing? Because we don't actually have a definitive answer on that. That's what makes Havoc Bane feel like it's going to weave really easily into the current dynamics of the game. But this right here, this whole fusion burst thing, all it does is damage. In a similar way, all Spectro Frazzle and all Arrow Erosion do. They all only deal damage. It's nothing other than damage. And this one over here, it doesn't even deal damage until it fucking detonates. And so it'll just be like on here, not doing anything until you reach the max number of stats, and then or max number of stacks, and then it'll have like an explosion. And like this to me is just, I would really need to see what the first character is that has this sort of dynamic built in, because it sounds like something where they might need a lot of support to even work properly. And so I would just really want to see what the first 1 or 2 characters of this archetype actually look like, but it could also be something that they weave into older characters. So we'll just see from there. I'm the most questionable about this one and its implementation. It seems a little bit simplistic, if I'm going to be real here. Now let's take a look at Glacio Chafe. And Glacio is one of those archetypes where anything goes, because the truth and reality of this is that we have 2 Glacio characters in the fucking game from limited banners: Carlotta and Jeja. Those 2 characters are some of the older ones in the game. It will be a year for Carlotta when 3.0 launches, and then Jeja is even like older than that. So that's just something to keep in mind. So Glacio's like anything kind of goes when it comes to this status effect. Some Glacio attacks will apply a stackable Chafe effect. When Glacio Chafe is inflicted, the target receives Glacio damage. Okay, awesome. Glacio Chafe stacks up to 10 times by default, and the higher the stacks, the more damage dealt. Seems like a blend. Each stack of Glacio Chafe effect reduces the target's movement speed, and when Glacio Chafe reaches max stacks, the target will be frozen, and all stacks of Glacio Chafe will be removed. And you can press the AD, the struggle button, to accelerate your own recovery when you're controlling the character. So this one over here sounds very interesting. It's a CC status effect. And the way that it works is that the higher you stack it up, the more damage it does. But then when you reach the max stacks, you inflict the CC, but then you lose the damage component. I'm actually very interested in seeing how they build out this one, because there's almost like 2 archetypes I can see forming. Maybe there's a character that doesn't do the freeze component, and they just build the stacks up to 10, and then every single other application that they do just ends up dealing more damage instead of freezing the boss, right? You could call it like hypothermia or some shit. I don't fucking know. And then you have another character that maybe only has a stack limit of 5, so they deal less damage, but they freeze more, right? I think that there's a lot of potential with this one, and the way that it's designed, where you could have comps that seem to have a lot more actual CC, but less damage built into it. And so, well, hey, it might make up for the fact that we have like more mobile enemies in the future that are more fragile. I don't really know. Think about how something like this would work against Hecate. It'd be amazing, wouldn't it, to have something like this for Hecate, where she's a way more fragile boss, but fights against her can take longer because, well, 90% of your attacks aren't landing on her. I like where the direction of this one is going. I like that it kind of like builds up damage, but then loses the damage stacks once the CC is applied. There's like a clear trade-off in its design over here, and there's a lot of playroom, right, for the Glacio element. So I really want to see a lot of variety. I want to see a lot of like creativity when it comes to how they flesh this one out. The sky is literally the limit because we have no Glacio characters, and I don't think a lot of people would necessarily complain because Carlotta is already so consistent. So they could have some fun with this attribute. I just want to see this one live up to its full potential. And now we're going to have the 4th one, Electro Flare. And this one is really interesting. While Electro Flare lasts, it deals periodic electro damage to the target. So it's another dot. It's the 3rd dot. The target loses half of the effect stacks with each instance of damage. It stacks up to 10 by default. The higher the stacks, the more damage dealt. So, yeah, it essentially is. It's a dot similar to Arrow Erosion and Spectro Frazzle, but it's got a special effect at max stacks. Any new stacked inflicted becomes stackable Electro Rage. Electro Rage increases the damage dealt by the next trigger, and Electro Rage is removed once triggered, and that stacks up to 10 times. And the more it stacks, the more damage it deals. Guys, this to me actually seems like a Yinlin buff. Because is there a better character to apply this debuff than Yinlin? I don't think there is. Just imagine that each of her coordinated attacks, each of her judgment strikes applies this. And then, right, her coordinated attacks last for a long time. Wouldn't this be really good on bosses? Where you're just continually resetting it, rotation over rotation. And then, by the end of the fight, the enemy has like 10 stacks of Electro Rage, and then 10 stacks of Electro Flare, and they're just taking a shit ton of damage from her coordinated attacks, because she's been stacking them up for so long over the fight. I really want to see this on Yinlin, and I want to see this like on her coordinated attacks. I want to see like spreading of Electro Flare. Like, when an enemy dies, Electro Flare, like, takes all the current stacks and then moves them to the next target. Her judgment strikes also move to the next target too. This to me literally screams Yinlin rework. And I pray that this is something that Kuro Games actually follows through on. Because what better way to rebalance some of the older units, then give them some new toys to play with. I think the design of this one is also really, really, really cool, just from like a thematic perspective. This seems like, this gives like a combat fantasy of like using this one attack or this one move to continually inflict damage over time, and then the number of stacks just ends up going crazy. You have 10 at a baseline, and then you have 10 on like the overcapped Electro Rage. And as long as there is, like, a character that has the capability to, like, inherit the stacks of, like, dead enemies and then, like, spread them back out in, like, multi-wave content, that's just something that I would love to see, too. Right? Because multi-wave content is something that makes damage over time feel like dog shit in every game mode. In every game that was ever made. Right? It also, like, Dot feels bad in HSR too. Dot feels bad in a bunch of different contexts. And so, as long as there's something to really, like, fix how that damage type is designed, I could really see Electro Flare become something really, really, really neat as the game expands and as the game goes on. I'm really excited for the design of all of these debuffs. I think all of them look fantastic, aside from Fusion Burst. I think I've explained why, simply because the other ones seem to have a lot of creativity involved, and this one is, like, literally just, hey, build up a certain number of stacks and, like, deal damage. I think the rest of these ones, they're really showing a very, very bright future for this game, and a bright future for its design. I just think that at this point, though, as this gets built out a lot more, maybe we do actually have to look into, and maybe this is something that's going to be a little bit crazy, but you guys know how, when you put on Zani's weapon, right? A tagline that you see is amplify Spectral Frazzle damage dealt by 50%. What if this tagline just gets changed into negative status effect damage? That might just have to be something that gets added in as like an echo roll. That might have to be something that gets added in as like a 3 cost or as like some sort of stat in the future. Not amplify negative status damage, but just like negative status damage as a percentage stat. Because we got basic attack, right? We got heavy attack, we got liberation, we got resonance skill, we got echo skill now. Hey, is it just time to start having negative status damage as we flesh these out more and more? Because as far as I'm concerned, right, these are all dealing damage aside from Havoc Bane. That's their job. They're all dealing damage aside from Havoc Bane. I'm excited to see how this fleshes out more and more in the future. I think the design of Havoc Bane, the design of Chisa, the role that she's going to play seems pretty set in stone for now. And I think it's a bright road ahead if I'm gonna be entirely honest. I think they've hit it out of the park with this one, aside from Fusion Burst. But like I said before, I'm gonna wait and see what the first iteration of this type of character looks like before making too much of a judgment call on this one. But for these two, I clearly see the vision. I see what's going on. Let me know what you thought about this one, ladies and gentlemen, and peace out.